Empathy is a core principle of any healthy society, culture, community, anything. And so a leader, in my opinion, is somebody who has empathy and who is willing to stand up for the underdog.
Welcome back to Case Studies. I'm here with somebody who's very dear to our family, and we'll get into that on kind of why that's the case. Mara Sundwall, who is Chelsea's life coach. She's also our daughter Callie's life coach. She's also Tex's birth mom. Brianna's coach, which she donates and does for free, which is like the raddest thing ever. And yeah, you're just really special. And I wanted to do this one for a long time. And I think the reason is because of the progression that I've seen with Chelsea. And just the personal growth. And I think all of us, mental health. I was talking to a kid this morning who was actually on this podcast with me, and we kind of opened up, and he struggles with mental health. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it kind of pretty authentically. And that was the piece of the podcast that got the most feedback.
Really?
And he got the most feedback. And so much of it was people just telling him, thank you for being willing to talk about it. Because I think people suffer a lot of times kind of alone, that they're scared, that there's fear of, if I let somebody know that I'm broken, they won't love me or they won't accept me or whatever it is. And so anyway, you've just made such a profound impact on, the people in my life that I care about. And so I want, first and foremost, to tell you thank you.
Oh, thank you, Casey.
Yeah.
I love your family.
Yeah. We love you. So talk to me about I want to go first to leadership. We'll go back to kind of, where this journey started for you. But talk to me about leadership. How do you think about being a leader? And how do you think about both leadership in your personal life and then also kind of leading in the physical world, in the real world?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question for me, because if you look at my history, you'd be like, I've had callings within our church. I've done things in my life where I'm like, you could label me a leader. But one thing that's always really fascinated me is quality leadership. And if you look at the example of Jesus Christ, he's the prime example, but he doesn't fit the mold of what the world defines as a good leader. I learned this recently, and it's so profound. The man who kind of coined the phrase alpha, he was a primatologist, and he studied chimpanzees and I think bonobo apes. And what he found was he originally wrote this long paper about how an alpha is somebody who's out in the front, and they're kind of aggressive and they're dominant. And he released this, and he said Wall Street kind of picked up on it, and this whole alpha phenomenon started, where an alpha is somebody who, they're aggressive. They sometimes have to mow people down to get to where they want to go. But as he continued his research, he found that the alpha is actually, he's a leader through empathy. He's a leader through example. He's a leader who has loyal followers because they trust him.
Wow.
And I thought this was so profound, because this aligns, in my opinion, so much more with the people that I've seen in my life who have exhibited those leadership qualities. I think a really good example of this, just in more contemporary times, is Stephen Covey. And he talks a lot about leadership, right? And I think that we misdefine alpha.
Yeah.
Alpha is the person who can exhibit empathy. Empathy is a core principle of any healthy society, culture, community, anything. And so a leader, in my opinion, is somebody who has empathy and who is willing to stand up for the underdog. He even talked about how aggression within a wolf pack, for example, it's much more limited. It happens a lot less than what was originally considered to be true. And so even an alpha isn't necessarily fighting for his position. He's fighting to maintain the system of the community. not so much to prove that he's the top dog. So it's just interesting to me in those terms that I think we misdefine leadership when we talk about alpha. And by the way, females also can be alpha. In the chimpanzee communities that he studied, he said there were male and females that exhibited similar personality types rather than, based on their gender. It was much more about the behaviors they were exhibiting as the alpha within the group.
So like what leaders in your life inspired you? Like who like what's the list, the 3 or the 5 that you said, this person was here for me in a time where I really needed this person?
It's such a great question because there have been key players in my life. And I think first and foremost would be my parents. I was raised in a family that wasn't actually meant to even happen. My parents, my dad was an Air Force Academy graduate. He went to law school at BYU. He has a degree, a higher level degree in engineering from Rice University. He's very well educated. And he and my mom, when they first got married right after he graduated from the Air Force Academy, had no plans of having children. They got married right after he graduated. They were not members. They were religious, but not members of any affiliation. And my mother's mom passed away shortly after my mom got married. And that really impacted my mother. She was like 22. She just really missed her mom. So when she was introduced to the missionaries at the World Fair of all places, they were like, "We're not really interested in your religion. We just want to hang out in your tent because there's air conditioning." And she overheard one of the missionaries talking about eternal families, and it just immediately caught my mom's attention. And she started asking questions. And my dad was a much harder sell. It took him a while to join the church, but when they did join the LDS church, they were all in, like obnoxiously in. We moved all over the world growing up. My dad worked for Mobil Oil. And we lived for a time in Africa. And at that time, there really wasn't much established religion within the country. And so my parents did home church. And I was always, even as a small child, I was 8, 9, 10 while we lived there. And I was always just impressed with their commitment to their values and to the things that they promised that they would do. And so I would say they were my number one examples of leaders within a family. My dad was a leader in various ways in his profession, but that didn't impress me quite as much as the way he led himself in his own life. He was up every morning studying scriptures. He exercised regularly. He was a leader in our home, and he and my mom led together in such a beautiful way that I don't know. I always really wanted to show up in my life the way that they showed up in theirs, regardless. I mean, obviously circumstances differ, right? But they were the first leaders in my life. I would say the next one, this will sound so weird, but it was a family I babysat for when I was 11 years old. My mom was very ill for a long time after her 8th child, and a lot of responsibility came to me as the oldest daughter. And one of the things I'd love to do was go babysit for this family on the weekends. And they were very wealthy, very influential in the community, and they trusted me. And they trusted me with their children, their home. And I just watched the way they not only treated their family, but and people. He was an influential, I think he was in commercial real estate. And so I'd see him with, he'd bring people to the house. He was always so kind to everyone. And he was so kind to me, this little girl. I was just a little girl. But his leadership qualities and just that empathy and interest, I think that genuine interest that he had in me as a person, it really struck me. And I think the third one I would say was there was a man, and this was after I was married, but there was a man who was in leadership in the church who was the most Christ-like person I've ever met. And everything that he did out of kindness and the goodness of his heart. And every time I saw him, it was like I was the only person, not only in the room, but like on the planet. He'd just stop and, how are you? How are your children? What have you been up to? Like, he really cared. And he showed that same kind of interest in my children. And so these aren't typical answers when we talk about leadership. These aren't typical answers, but I think sometimes it's beneficial for us to look beyond the structured definition of leadership and look at the way people choose to lead their own lives and how that influences those around them.
So it's interesting because the character traits that you're describing, I noticed those in you. So obviously you've studied, because deep empathy is something that's just critical for your job.
Yes.
You're obviously a person of faith.
Yes.
But the people that you coach, it's the entire range. It's the entire kind of human family. And they're everywhere on the spectrum.
And we all are, right?
Yeah.
Like even people of faith, we're in, various places on that journey. But you bring up a really good point. And this is where I think Christ is always the perfect leader, because he met everyone where they were. I was on a call the other day with a man who's going through a divorce, and he's like, "Hey, I just want you to know, I don't know where I am in my faith. So if that's a problem for you," and I'm like, "Oh no, I don't have a problem with that." And he's like, "Well, don't you just coach about religious things?" And I'm like, "No." I mean, if you think about religion, the principles associated with being a good person are incorporated in any religion, first of all. But also for people who are questioning their faith, they're also a part of any good life. The principles, the values remain the same. And that's why I think part of the coaching that I do is value based.
Yeah.
Right? It's not based on a religion. It's not based on where people are on their journey. But I think defining our own values and applying those in our lives, that's what keeps us in alignment with ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. So go back to the beginning. Like, where did this journey start for you? Because you have kind of and I would say I'm similar to you in the stuff that I study. There's tremendous amount of Stephen Covey and Tony Robbins and Joe Dispenza and Jim Rohn and a lot of these people that have impacted me so much. I went back and I was listening to an audiobook today called The Psychology of Achievement by Brian Tracy. And it was like nostalgic, because I listened to this audiobook my second summer when me and Chelsea were driving out to our area to go sell. And I remember listening to it for 20 hours, 20 years before. And It's all this stuff about, how you can have anything in your life. And I'm thinking about 20 years ago, I'm like, holy crap, I've been studying this stuff for a long time. But where did this journey begin of like, I want to go understand why people do what they do? And
such a great question. And I'm only laughing because you mentioned Tony Robbins and then this 20 hours of tapes you listen to. When I graduated high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I took this is before gap years were a thing. I took a gap year and I was working and I was listening. This is like the day of infomercials. And Tony Robbins had an infomercial for his unlimited power program. So I dropped like $300 of my poor girl money on this system, and they sent me all these cassette tapes, and I would sit in my bedroom and I had a waterbed. This is how old I was. This is how long ago it was. But I'm sitting in my waterbed listening to Tony Robbins and replacing the cassette tapes. And because I would love to say that my initial desire was just to go out and spread goodness in the world. I didn't understand myself at all. And people around me didn't understand me. My teen years were rocky. It was hard. We moved a couple of times. I got in with a bad set of kids, and I wasn't a horrible kid, but I found myself kind of looking at some of my choices and being like, what's going on here? What's wrong with me? And that became kind of the guiding question, which I wrote a whole story in my mind about. Like when I think like, what's wrong with me? Like, why are my parents angry with me? Or why did these friends drop me? The question was always, what's wrong with me? And so I'd write these, we're storytellers. Humans are storytellers, right? And so I'd write these incredible stories in my head about all the things that were wrong with me. And yet there's that core part of us that there was a part of me that was like, something has to be right here. That can't just be a mess all the time. And so this is when I found the Tony Robbins tapes. But going back even before that, I think it's really important that we talk about storytelling, because the human brain is designed to tell stories. And we won't go into all the neuroscience of it, but the way the brain develops, the right hemisphere develops before the left. And the right is the one in which we feel feelings and sensations. And, as small children, we can't make sense of those things, right? But that becomes part of our neurobiology. And then as we grow, as the left hemisphere starts to grow, we start to try to make meaning of those feelings, those sensations in our body. And I think the meaning I made of a lot of things that I experienced in my life, the meaning was, it's my job I'm responsible for everyone else's happiness, and I have to prove that I'm enough. And that belief that I'm not enough is core to just about I've worked with hundreds of people now, and it's
universal.
It's universal.
Yeah.
It is universal. Yeah. And so because I'm listening to my Tony Robbins tapes, right? Like I'm trying to make sense of who I am and what I needed to do to become enough. And I went off to college. I finally decided to go to college, but I spent probably the next 25 years in that space of stepping back and watching myself. How am I showing up with people? What am I choosing? Who am I becoming? And I made a lot of really great choices, but there were a lot of things in my life that limited my ability to really see that so much of my story was wrong.
Yep.
Right?
There was something that had you searching.
Yes.
Like that there was some search. And I think that search is like really profound. Me and Chelsea have talked about this. There was this point for me, I was 28 or 29 years old, and Vivint had just sold to Blackstone. And it was kind of this surreal experience where I got paid more money than I'd ever dream about making at a young age. But I also like had skipped so many steps to get there. Like I dropped out of college, had tons of insecurity, on my career path. I was a door-to-door salesman. I had these stories, that on the outside, I had like this crazy financial success and had tons of insecurities. I just was not comfortable in my own shoes. And my answer was I need to go get more education. And so I went and did an executive program at Harvard, and it was fantastic for me. Like it really filled in a bunch of gaps. But then there was about a decade where I just felt this like burning desire to get as much education as I could get. And I still remember Chelsea asking me, she's like, what do you think it is? And I'm like, I don't know. There's just something like calling to me. There's something like telling me I need to prepare. And I think, and I've actually seen that recently with Chelsea, where there's just there's something calling to her saying, hey, like you need to grow. But it sounds like you've had this for a long time. There was something that was just telling you like, you need to go search, you need to go grow. Like,
well, and I want to get to Chelsea because there's one thing she did once that was so beautiful and it stuck with me, like since the day I met her, honestly. But my side of that story is, yes, it's everything you're describing. It's this insatiable desire to know why I'm here and what I'm supposed to be doing. And I stayed home and raised kids. And even while I was doing that, I remember I'd be driving kids to school, and I'd have Stephen Covey on, CD. This was the age of the CD, right? I was always trying to learn and to grow. And I'm not what you would call a traditionally educated person. It's interesting that you said that you felt like you had skipped some steps. I feel like I skipped all the steps. I did do a couple of years of college, but I didn't ever finish my degree. And I feel like I had to really overcome some narratives about like, I'm not qualified, right?
Yeah.
I'm not in a position, or I haven't earned the right to be working with people or to be talking about things that I don't have a PhD in. But I invite you to see too, though, Casey, like you didn't really skip any steps. Like for you, your journey, this path that you're on, it's not about like, okay, you hit every milestone the same way as other people who've been in the same line of work or the same fields you have been. And every single person has their own process.
But it's taken me a long time. It's taken me a long time to get there.
Sure. Yeah.
But I can absolutely say at this point in my life, I'm completely comfortable with my journey.
That's
and
awesome.
proud of it.
And how does that feel?
Feels so good.
Right?
But it took a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think so much of it was on a subconscious level. I didn't even know that this stuff was happening.
Yeah.
But and a lot of it, I got into a practice. It was probably 4 or 5 years ago. And again, everything kind of goes back to Tony Robbins. It's funny, but I went to a Tony Robbins business mastery course, and I remember going back and telling Chelsea, I was like, it's kind of like a spiritual experience. She's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no, I don't know how to explain it other than like I had like some real breakthroughs. But I think some of those breakthroughs were breaking down kind of the state, story, and strategy. Like, what is my emotional state when I'm attacking life? And like, there's times where I have a great energy and I show up and just get things done. And there's other times where I show up with not very good energy and don't get things done. And so it's like really actually taking accountability for my state. But the second one is your story.
Yeah.
And really spending time on my story and rewriting my story. And I remember going to a course. It's a Harvard course. It's a week-long. You would love it. It's on authentic leadership.
That sounds
And there
awesome.
was this general in the military that he was one of the professors. And he said something that profoundly impacted me. And he said, the story of your life isn't your life. It's your story.
That's so good.
And I didn't get it. I had to like actually rerun that like
Mm-hmm.
2 or 3 times because I was thinking like, well, no, I can remember my life. I could go back and but it's not your life. It's your story. It's how you framed it and the meaning that you put with it. And I think over the last 5 or 6 years, I've spent a lot of time really focusing on my identity and who I am and trying to rewrite that story, and just like being really proud of the decisions I've made, the career decisions, the life decisions, financial decisions, and just the good, the bad, and the ugly, just owning it.
And see, Casey, I think this is why you're so influential, because you're willing to tell the truth about your story. And the stories that we tell ourselves are just stories. But we do end up, the way the brain works is we go toward what we're focused on, right? So if the story is I've got to prove my worth, or I need to show up a certain way to earn love, that's what we do. We think it, we feel it, and then we do it. And yet it's never enough. If it were enough, then it would manifest in us really accepting ourselves in that story. But the stories are false. And Chelsea and I talk about truth all the time. In fact, I hope she doesn't feel like I'm outing her, but sometimes we'll text in the middle, like early in the morning. Like she studies, I study early in the morning, and we'll throw stuff back and forth. And a lot of it goes back to truth. We're not telling ourselves the truth when we're telling ourselves stories, because our worth isn't tied up in how much money we make, how many clients we have, where we live, what we drive. It's not tied up in all of those things. And when we make our story about those things, then we are denying truth, the truth of who we are and why we're here.
Yeah, it's so profound. I was thinking Stephen Covey was kind of the first one who captured it for me. And he wrote a book. I think it was one of his first books. It was called The Divine Center.
Yeah, it's a great book.
And it was kind of a prequel to The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It was more spiritual language, but he talks about that principle center, and in that book he says Christ center. And later on he moves it to principle center. It's kind of a more secular language.
Right.
But the point is that if you get your center from your prestige in the community, or the amount of money in your bank account, or the letters next to your degree, or whatever it is, that it's outside of your control. You know what I mean? And that those things can change. And that, but if you can have a solid center, if you could have something that's firm and that's, and he talks about some of these centers that you would think are good centers. He talks about like church centered.
He talks about family.
Yeah, family centered. That you'd think, it's family's a center's a great center.
Until things go off the rails.
But it's not. Yeah. Like if it at extremes, it's not. Having a church center or like a religion center isn't great if it's taken to extremes, But if you can have kind of a principle center, then all that stuff fits within those centers, which is what you're describing. It's just truth. If you can really say, hey, truth is my center, I'm going to go figure out what's true and let that be kind of what guides me.
And the great thing about that is that it provides safety. The human brain really as an organism is designed for survival.
Yeah.
And so when we put our worth in something like family, religion, a job, whatever role, usually role-based, identities, then what we're doing is we're putting that power outside of us.
Yeah.
So we go through a divorce, or we lose the job, or, something happens in the world, then yes, that shakes that core. The great thing about being principle centered, having a core that's based on truth and your identity as, who you were created to be, is no one can take that away from you. The perfect example of this, I love Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about how, when he was in the concentration camp and his family, his profession, his home, everything was gone. And he was walking back one day from, I think they had him at the time working in a mine or something, and he has no shoes, his feet are bleeding, it's freezing cold, and he's miserable. And he's like, I had this this moment of just clarity that the only thing I had left was my attitude, the way I choose to show up every day in this circumstance.
It's agency.
It's agency. It's all agency based. And what I loved about what he did moving forward is he would start to visualize himself back in a classroom, teaching and contributing. He was I think a psychotherapist.
Yeah.
And years later, after the war, he manifested all the things that he had dreamed about and visualized while in the concentration camps. And the reason I say this is because, everything had been stripped from him, but no one can take our agency. No one can take our identity when it's founded in truth, not on roles, not on positions, not on material things. And I think, going back to Chelsea really quick, what I immediately thought, just loved her because she and Callie came one day to my home and we were talking, and I showed her, I do this little game with umbrellas. It's this picture of a bunch of different colors of umbrellas. And I say, I want you to count how many red umbrellas you see, and you have 5 seconds. And so they did it and they counted, and no one ever gets the right amount because it's not enough time to count them. But the point is, when we're looking for the red umbrellas, we don't see really many other things in the picture. Everything else is peripheral. And so I asked questions like, what other colors did you see? How many, blue umbrellas were there? And the point is that, we go toward what we focus on. When we give our brain a directive, it will seek out that thing.
We had this, in one of those same courses, we had this exercise that talked about that same thing.
Okay. Yeah.
And the way that they did the experiment was they had these kids passing a ball. So it's a video of these kids passing a ball. And the job for all of the students was to count how many passes took place. Mm-hmm. These kids just passing in a circle. And they do it, and then they ask the class, and it's 10 or it's 12 or it's 11. And then they ask the class, did you see the black gorilla? And everybody's like, what are you talking? And then they redo the film, and you see the kids passing the ball, and then somebody in a gorilla costume literally walks like in the middle.
Really?
And walks out. And no one saw the gorilla. Like, how do you miss a black gorilla person in a gorilla suit? And it was because they were so focused, and the point was that we miss things. We miss a tremendous amount of like obvious stuff that's hiding in plain sight. And I think that principle is so profound. I like work on this stuff so much personally, about kind of this idea that what's right is always available. Or what's wrong is always available, but so is what's right.
Yes. We just don't always see it.
And it's a choice. And try to remind myself to like really count my many blessings and what am I grateful for, and to see. Because if I don't, sometimes you just get buried. Like life gets hard. And
well, we generate more. It's called a thought loop. But when we're seeking out something, out there in the world, especially something negative, and we find it, and there's almost a confirmation bias, and we feel a certain way. Well, when we feel a certain way, it kicks the attention from the body back up into the brain, which then just creates more attention toward that thing. It's almost like myopathy. Like where we're just looking for those things in our lives. And this is why when you listen to people's stories, and I love my job because I hear people's stories all day.
Yeah.
Right. And what I do is I hope I don't tell people what to do with their lives. I stand as almost like an objective observer and just say, tell me more about this. And as people's stories are drawn out and they start to recognize oh yeah, you're right. We talk a lot about the difference between facts and thoughts. There's so many things in the world that we make so much meaning about, when in actuality it's just something that happened or just something that exists that we just create a story around. So when I was doing this umbrella test with Chelsea, she literally leaned in with her whole body and she was like, I want to know more about this. Like I want to work on me. And I was like, okay. And so I love Chelsea for her. She's just a determined girl. When she puts her mind to something, she just goes at it. And this is where the work really comes in handy. This isn't therapy, right? This is looking at our stories and starting to identify. And Chelsea did this so beautifully because she was willing. We have to be willing to sit back and look at what we're creating for ourselves. For a lot of people, that creates a lot of shame because we see, oh, wait, I'm not doing the right thing or I'm doing it wrong.
Yeah.
Which in actuality, that's not the truth. It's just what we're telling ourselves. Right. And so a lot of people back away from it. They're afraid of it.
I mean,
Chelsea
I've
was
been
willing
married
at
to Chels for 19 years and she's always been awesome.
Yeah.
But there's been the last 4 or 5 years where there's just this tremendous amount of personal work that you can see it manifesting in like the most fun and interest as a husband, the most fun ways, because you're just watching her fly, you know, and it's so fun.
Yeah, she's pretty amazing
to watch her fly, but she's, you know, but you also like see the tears and you see the, you know,
because
the pain and the
the
pain and the growth. And I think there's so many times where it's like, do I really have to go through this? And the answer is kind of
yes.
You do. Like
the answer is yes.
Yeah, that is the tuition.
Chelsea and I went to Arthur Brooks came to speak it was probably March, I think. But he's a psychiatrist he's something of importance at Harvard.
Yeah.
he studies emotions a lot. And something he said was so profound. He said, happiness is not an emotion. It's not a feeling. It's a state of being.
Interesting.
And that shifted so many things just for me, because if you think about it, you ask people what they want, right? I want my kids to be happy. I want to be happy. But we don't look at happiness as it's a holistic experience. We can't feel joy without feeling pain. We can't feel excitement without knowing the opposite of it.
Yeah.
And Arthur Brooks talks about this beautifully. But Chelsea personifies, in my opinion, I've seen her cry. There have been really hard things that she's had to face and to work through and to face again and again and again.
Yeah.
But it's the courage. It takes so much courage to face ourselves down.
No, it really is. We were talking about it the other night, and there was this one crossroads where she had taken on this charity trip. And it was a trip to Mexico, and it was 100 plus people. And it was just getting hard. There were some complications, you know, the working with a lot of different groups. And it was literally one of those nights where there's fear that people aren't going to show up, that it's not going to be what you want it to be or whatever, that they're paying too much, all those things. And it was kind of one of these crossroads where I was like, Chels, like, we still got plenty of time. Like, you can kill this thing. No one is forcing us or you to go down this road, you know. And she listened and did the opposite and said, nope, we're going to do it. And it was this magical trip, and everybody who went had just this fantastic experience. But I've seen that crossroads kind of almost go to the point of breaking, pick yourself up, and then go. And it's so fun because at this point it's like a muscle.
Yeah.
It's like this.
It is a muscle.
It becomes like a strength.
Mm-hmm.
You just kind of know, I'm going to get through anything.
Because you've created enough evidence that you can get through anything. And I think it's that evidence base. So when in 2020, when COVID hit, I was going through a divorce. My youngest was graduating high school. I had one on a mission. One was getting married. We sold our house and I moved into this little cottage. Like, I think everything but a death, like major life events, happened in that year. And it was COVID. And I lived in Seattle, where everyone was afraid of everyone for like 2 straight years when COVID was going on. And so when this was happening, I call it my coming undone. I literally had to kind of deconstruct and rebuild who I chose to be. And I bring this up because at that point in my life, I really felt like there was something that God wanted me to do. And he was very specific about, I thought about going back to school. I was doing marketing for a company at the time, out at new employee orientation at Microsoft. I was like, I could stay in this business. And I felt so compelled to start studying certain things, not to go back to school. For me, it wasn't go back and get your degree. It was so directed. And during a time where I didn't have much faith in myself. And so I started creating evidence that I could have confidence in who I was. I started tracking things every day. It wasn't even so much how much I worked out every day, how much I studied, how much I socialized. Socialization was a really important part because I'm not used to being alone at the time. And I tracked it. There's a theory. Have you ever heard of the Seinfeld effect?
No.
It's kind of cool. Seinfeld, when he was becoming a well-known comedian, he decided in order to get to where he wanted to go, he needed to apply his comedic skills. So he'd either write content or he'd perform for someone every day, every single day, even if it was for a minute or two. And then he got a calendar and he'd just mark X's. And it became this chain effect, which for him helped him build the identity of being a comedian. So I'm like, I like that. I can do that. I can build Mara from the inside out, and I can use this structured approach of tracking what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, and create evidence that I'm showing up in my own life. And through kind of a process I created for myself, I did rebuild from the inside out. And I call it COVID University. But I studied hours and hours every day during that period because I had the time to, but also because I just felt so directed. And during that time, I had the opportunity to meet a lot of amazing people and to really start to look back at my life and evidence I had created and completely overlooked, because in talking about that myopathy, right, where if we're just looking for certain things, we're going to overlook so much.
Yeah.
So I took a much more objective approach, and I'm like, where have I shown up in my life? Where have I been a leader? Where have I shown compassion? Where have I served when I literally had nothing else to give?
Yeah.
And there was so much evidence that I had never even stopped to look
So
at.
one of the exercises in this course is you go back and you kind of map your life's journey.
Yep.
And you actually write the things that you're proud of.
Really?
And you go through this process. It's so profound. It was profound doing it. And then it was profound seeing people do it, because you could see that you know, when you read the scriptures, they talk so much about remembering. And I think when we forget about, you know, what we've done, we don't have the strength to try new things. I think when we remember that I've done hard things, that I have accomplished, it gives you confidence to try and to, you know what I mean, to go forward.
Well, there's neurobiology to it too. When you celebrate wins, like, you know, looking back at our lives and giving ourselves credit for things we've done well or for ways we've shown up that are in alignment with our values, your dopamine center is activated.
Yeah.
And dopamine helps to rewire your brain faster.
Wow.
So in neuroplasticity, when you're telling yourself the truth about things you may have completely overlooked most of your life, when you tell yourself the truth about it, you get a dopamine hit and you rewire your brain faster to trust yourself more, and it's about integration, right? Building that identity from the inside out rather than allowing things from the outside to tell us who we are and what our level of importance is. That is powerful, and no one can take it away from you.
Wow, it's amazing. So how do you coach that? Like when you're sitting down with somebody for the first time, like what's your process?
My process is primarily to listen and then to tease out the stories, because again, we believe what we tell ourselves, right? So and just to backtrack a tiny bit, human development, the way the human mind develops is we start as egomaniacs. We're all little narcissists when we're babies. We have to survive, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to get everything that we can in a way that ensures our survival.
Yeah.
We then shift to what's called second person perspective, where we can identify that there's an us and a them, right? Or the other. But a lot of us get stuck there.
Yeah.
And there's so much to talk about there, but third person perspective is essentially when we can step outside of ourselves. We can look at us, we can look at the other or the world around us and see the way that we are interacting with that world, or the way that we think that world is affecting us, but it's from an objective standpoint. I'm the objective third person in people's stories, and I teach them how to do that for themselves.
Yeah, so you start there of just listening and being that third person.
Yes.
But the goal is to go...
The goal
allow them to be able to self-regulate or to do it by themselves. I think about this Covey principle of the space between stimulus and response.
Yeah.
And that as you exercise that space, it expands.
Viktor Frankl talked about it too.
Yeah.
And that's it. If you think about it, when we think there's just us and the other, and that whatever the other is doing is affecting us directly, we're reactive, we're fear-based, there's very little room between the stimulus and the response. When we have enough wherewithal and we've taught ourselves the skills to step back, we can pause. We're not survival based in that moment. We can step back and be like, is there something to what they're saying? Is there something I'm making meaning of that isn't actually true? And we can generate more. And if you look at it from the nervous system, what we're doing is expanding the window of tolerance, where we can stay regulated and be like, well, that person is really angry right now. What can I take away from this where I can learn? I can choose how I want to respond and know that it doesn't mean anything about me. So much of other people's reactivity, we become reactive because they're triggering shame in us. Right?
Yeah.
And so I teach people how to become an objective observer in their own lives. We don't get perfect. It's messy. We're using a human brain and nervous system to rewire a human brain and nervous system. It's the messiest. I think it's probably one of the messiest things we do, but it's also hands down one of the most gratifying.
Yeah. Talk to me about what's next. Like, what gets you excited when you're thinking about the future? Like, what lights you up?
You know what? I mean, I just really love people. I really love working with people. I love the one-on-one. A lot of, and you know, the phrase life coach, to me, it's a misnomer because I don't really coach people on how to live their lives. I don't tell people what to do. I don't have great advice about what's next for Casey. What I help people do is to determine what they want and then teach them the tools to regulate themselves and to learn themselves in a way that they can show up for themselves to create the thing that they want. So I don't love the phrase life coach, but it is what it is.
It just kind of is.
It's what we're
the category. Yeah.
Yes. But for me, I think the next thing is I've been working on some content about two things. Teenagers, right? These kids are inundated. Their attention is a commodity. All of our attention is a commodity, right? And so many of them are starting to catch on to the fact that the way the world is trying to direct them or to desensitize them doesn't resonate with their values.
Serve them well.
It does not serve them well. It doesn't. So I've been working on some content to do some maybe group things, not coaching wise, because my personal opinion is group coaching is not super effective. People don't show up genuinely as themselves. They don't. They don't. But teaching in a teaching capacity, and then also parents are really up against it. Learning ourselves is the best way we can show up as parents because we're wired a certain way. From our own childhoods, right? From our own life experiences.
I mean, it's been so profound for me to have you both work with my daughter.
I love her.
And then also work with Chelsea at the same time. Mm. And I don't know which one has grown more because I've seen Chelsea be a better mom and show up better for Callie and just show up better. And I think a lot of it is the personal work that she's putting in. Where, and I think Callie, she has been through an entire cycle of just figuring out who she is and, what she wants, how she wants to show up. And, and she's so fantastic. Like, she's incredible.
Yeah, she is. She's got some deep wisdom. And these kids do have deep wisdom.
She really does. Yeah. And it's fun. It's been a safe place for her. Mm-hmm. Like it really has. It's created so much value for us because as mom and dad, we just lose influence. Like it's just the nature of the beast.
It's
is like
supposed to be that way.
Yeah, like she cares less about what we say. I think she still values it.
Oh, definitely.
But some independent voices that aren't mom and dad have been just so helpful in the journey of figuring things out.
And that's biological. I mean, we are wired as teenagers to push against parents. It's like the cracking of the egg.
Yeah.
Their job is to emerge as adults, right? Yeah. And so, a lot of times parents are like, why are they pushing back? Why aren't they doing what I tell them to do? I'm like, it's okay. It really is okay. They are listening. They are hearing you, but it is biologically sound that they push back, that they ask questions, that they're trying to formulate their own identity.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean anything's going horribly wrong. But you're right. I mean, that old saying that, it takes a village to raise a kid. For some reason, I don't know why anymore we don't rely on that the way we used to societally, but it is absolutely true. We need other people in their lives to help direct them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just be there for them, show up for them.
So knowing what you know now, like what advice would you give to a parent or, not just a parent for teens, because I think that's
Mhm.
one category and actually
Yeah.
like is super relevant.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start there. What advice would you give to a parent with a teen that's struggling? Like if they were saying, Mara, I need your help,
Mhm.
where would you start with that teen?
When I work with teens, I actually make it mandatory that I have sessions with the parents. In fact, you came once. Remember you and
I do remember
Chelsea
that.
came to my
Yeah.
house.
Yeah.
Um, I I try to help parents understand that for a teen to feel like you are on their team, that is, in my opinion, the number one thing you can do for them. So often, and there's so much behind it, but it automatically feels like it's us against them,
Yeah.
right? They want things we don't want them to have, or they don't like your rules, and so it feels like this battle. It doesn't take too much effort. A lot of it is invalidation and just saying, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I understand why you want to stay out till 2 a.m. That makes sense to me. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. We don't have to agree with what they're saying. But what that does is it says you're okay. It says the way you're thinking and feeling makes sense to me. It doesn't mean you'll get what you want, but there's nothing wrong with wanting it. And I think so often when a parent says to a kid, like, what's wrong with you? Why do you want that? Or why are you pushing back against it? What it says to a kid is something's wrong with me.
Something's wrong with you.
That I'm not seeing the world the way my mom and dad are. The other thing is really learning to regulate our emotions. For a kid who comes home and says, my friend group dumped me, and then for a parent to just freak out, I can't believe they did that. They're such idiots, whatever. What it says is, oh, this isn't a 15-year-old kid problem. This is like this is a problem that made
problem.
Made an adult freak out. So this must be bigger than me.
That's like me and Chelsea's like worst nightmare is like we are like completely screwing up our kids. Like all the stuff. Yeah. It's like this is the parents' problem for sure.
No, you guys are doing a good job. but it is, I think, in a nutshell, I think parents who are working on themselves, that has an immediate and direct effect on their parenting. Parents that are willing to just look at themselves and work through some of their own things, it has an immediate, going back to the stimulus and response. When you're able to pause when a kid is coming at you, right, or they're upset about something, when you're able to pause and really formulate a response rather than react, that's only available if we're doing our work. It's not the kid's job to create that for us, right?
Yeah. And then say it's not the teenager. Mm-hmm. Say that it's somebody that's just in life. Mm-hmm. Where are you starting with that person?
It's the same answer.
It's the same process.
It's the same. It's do your work. And that's such a benign phrase, but really what that means is start to create the capacity and curiosity to self-confront.
But do you think it's just a practice that is never taught or completely neglected all the way growing up? Because it's not taught in high school. It's not taught, No. And so do you think it's just something that some people intuitively get it better than others, or?
Yeah, I think some people catch on a little better than others, but you're right. It's not taught. There's no course in high school, at least, and maybe in college, but not one I took, where we're taught the steps of how to take care of ourselves within that space of self-confrontation. Because that's what happens. Typically, somebody will start asking questions like, why do I feel this way? And why does this affect me so much? And usually we bump into something that's triggering shame and we back away. Sometimes we run. Okay. And I've seen it happen where people are like, yeah, this isn't for me. And that's okay. They're just not in a space yet to do that work.
Yeah.
But I think we have to.
They're scared to go there.
And it makes sense. Yeah. You talk about identity. If your identity is wrapped around a few things or is attached to a few things that you may, when self-confronting, realize this isn't good for me or isn't even who I want to be, then that is an almost immediate identity crisis.
Yeah.
And if there's anything we will cling to, it is our identity.
Yeah.
The brain prefers homeostasis. Even if it's a familiar misery, we will choose that.
You'll go there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Over an unfamiliar.
How much of that is subconscious that we actually haven't spent the time to root it out and say, this is actually like a self-limiting belief that I have that's not serving me well.
And that is the goal. But self-confrontation, if we do it without either support from somebody who we trust, which really, in a nutshell, therapy, coaching, whatever it is It's having that other person hold enough space and helping us feel secure enough so that we can self-confront.
Interesting. That's so interesting. Yeah, like I've lived it. You know, I've seen the benefits, and so it's fascinating to hear. Like, what's your why when you're really like drilling down? Like, why do you do it?
Why do I do what I do? Because I genuinely love people. And I especially, all the years, I'm 52 now, all the years I've been alive, I've seen people in pain and some people in a lot of pain. And what I started realizing years ago is it's self-inflicted. Even my own pain on so many levels.
The suffering.
Yes, the suffering is self-inflicted. Pain is part of life, right? But when we take that pain and we make it mean something about us, or mean that it's evidence that we're not enough or that there's something wrong with us, that's suffering.
Yeah.
And I've seen enough people in my life where that has been the case, that it is so can't even think of the word. I love it so much when I see somebody step out of themselves and turn around and look at themselves with compassion and say, oh, this makes sense. It's not serving me well, but it makes sense why I've been this way or why I've been choosing this thing.
Yeah.
Because we cannot change anything that we're not aware of.
Yeah. So early on, you kind of go on this journey. Did you coach all the way through? Or was it like living life, being a mom, kind of like when did this cycle?
I was, but I didn't realize it.
So you were just always doing it. Was it like a mentorship thing? Was it like
it was a friendship
informal thing?
Very informal.
Yeah.
Like I served I served the youth in the church up in Seattle for a lot of years. And I would develop relationships with them where they'd call me and be like, my boyfriend broke up, or my mom and I had a fight, or this thing happened, or that thing happened. And I'd be like, tell me about it. And I'd just listen to them and I'd validate them. And I started to realize, like, most of the time we don't need a lot of advice. What we need is somebody to listen. And we really need someone to just be available for that. And so that's kind of how I started out. I just did it as an offshoot of a calling and in friendships and things like that. But during my divorce, I was involved with a larger group of women, and we would call each other and kind of mentor each other. And that's where I kind of got my footing. I met a few women in that program, and a couple of them I still coach. This was 5 years ago, and some of us still talk weekly. And it's just a gift. It's relational. We are relational beings.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to be vulnerable enough to step into relationships and be like, here's my mess. And they're like, here's my mess.
So talk to me about divorce. Mm-hmm. Like, it's 50% of the world experiences it.
I know.
I don't think anybody signs up to experience it.
No.
I don't think anybody on the front end. Talk to me about one kind of how that impacted your identity, and what were the steps to go navigate.
So it impacted my identity because in my situation in particular, I went into a marriage believing it was my job to make someone happy. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times when a person is in a lot of pain, they will use other people's pain against them.
Yeah.
And so in my particular circumstance, I think I worked really hard and stayed really true to my convictions and my values for 24 years. And there were so many chances. There were so many, it was a bumpy road, and I learned so much. And I don't have animosity towards my ex-husband.
Yeah.
But what I chose to do was grow and learn and move on. And at the point where we divorced, it was evident to me that there was no correlative effort in regard to our marriage. And so, yes, I had a huge amount of my identity wrapped up in being a good wife, being a good mother, being a pillar, right, in the family. And that was a very hard time for me. And I don't regret it. I don't even regret the marriage because I learned so much. But I think, again, we have to be willing to confront ourselves and say, what part did I take in this?
What was the ugly stuff that you found that you're just like, I didn't realize that I was contributing here,
for
here,
me,
and here. Yeah.
I was so codependent. I was willing to just take on anyone else's problems and poor choices and things like that and make it about me.
Yeah.
And then turn it around and try to fix. And that was a hard thing to confront myself on, because I had always kind of labeled it as compassion, right? As selflessness.
Yeah.
But codependency isn't like just glomming onto someone else and living life with them. It's too little love for self. It's not too much love for someone else. It's too little love for self. And I really, in a really painful way, lost a huge part of my identity for a long time. Oh. And that's why when I say that deconstruction and rebuilding during COVID, my COVID university was it was so freeing, but so painful.
Yeah.
It was gut-wrenchingly painful.
I've had, so many friends at this point either get divorced or their parents got divorced. Yeah. And it's this interesting thing, like how, I think it's just human nature, like how you respond to crisis.
Yeah.
And I do think like that if you have a lot of your identity tied up in that like it absolutely like rocks the foundation.
Yes,
I had one of my buddies that, had really strong faith, was newly married, was the oldest in his family, and his parents get divorced, and it just completely rocked him. Where he's going back and questioning everything, literally like the entire foundation of everything. And it's taken him, a lot of years to kind of get comfortable in his own shoes and to just, you know what I mean? And probably go back and empathize with his parents that they were doing the best they could. And, they made mistakes, but they were, life's hard for them too. I think you kind of, until you're a parent, you think that they have it all figured out. Then you realize you don't have much of it figured out.
You don't. And you want to. I truly have compassion for everyone who's trying their best. And I do think for the most part, human beings are trying their best. Right. But going back to what we were talking about with a principle-centered living, when you stake your identity on anything, on a relationship, on being a wife or being a husband or having a perfect family, whatever the thing is, all of that can come crashing down. And I remember actually having a dream once during the divorce where like my house was on fire and I was just standing outside of it, watching it burn. And I just remember the feeling during that dream. I think I could label it as just total surrender. I was just like, okay, my house is coming down. Right. And that was really.
You're dreaming about it.
It was such a prevalent part of that period in my life. And I can look back now and see so much growth, right? And so many positive things that have come out of it. But I think much of my identity was wrapped up in those roles.
Yeah.
Conversely, what it did do for me at that time was help me redefine my relationship with God. Because I realized in so many ways I was trying to prove myself to God. Like, I'm worth it. I'm look at me. I'm a hard worker. I'm all in. I'm living my life based on those values. Yeah. And all along, he didn't need me to prove it. He loved me anyway, right? Yeah. He loved me for who I was, where I was, what he saw me trying to do. And it was a huge paradigm shift for me that I don't have to earn God's approval or love. Like, I already have that.
Yeah.
And I just want to grow in that relationship.
I think what you're describing is grace.
Yeah. Oh, so much grace. So much grace. I think we don't talk enough about grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so profound.
It's so profound.
And it like is kind of everything.
Yeah.
It's like really understanding that principle that, like that we're all doing the best we can. And that if you're striving and moving forward, know that ultimately, God's grace is sufficient. And I think about that a lot. And I think about giving grace. And I'm better at giving grace when I can show empathy towards myself. You know what I mean? Like when I'm kind to myself, I'm way more kind to others. And when I'm a little too hard on myself, I find myself holding kind of a more rigid standard for everybody else around me. And I think most of it's kind of I'm mad at myself or I'm frustrated with myself. I think about this John Maxwell quote where he says, hurting people hurt people and are easily hurt by people. And I think about that a lot where I see this behavior that doesn't match, it's kind of really reactionary and emotional. And you just realize like that person's hurting.
They are hurting. And if you think about it within the context of the first two great commandments, love God, right?
Yeah.
With all your heart and soul and mind, and then love your neighbor as yourself. Conversely, it goes back to that second person perspective we were talking about. If in our minds we don't have God in his position first as the objective third player in all the dynamics that happen here on earth, then everything that goes on between people is either from a place of love or fear, and fear always drives pain.
Yeah.
And so if I hate myself, I'm going to project that out. Projection is just a basic human function of self-protection. But if I love myself, then I have the capacity to love another. And to me, it's so simple. And maybe I'm simplifying it too much, but we leave out the love the neighbor as the self.
Yeah.
That it's an essential part of the equation.
Yeah. This has been so fun for me.
Thank you. I've so enjoyed this.
I hope it's the first of many. And I think about this idea of like continuous improvement and these habits and these rituals. What are your habits and rituals to continue to grow? Like you talk about this kind of COVID university, but what have you taken from that? That you say, this is who I am. This is how I progress.
I love that we're talking about habits and not goals. Goals are important, right? They're great. But if we don't have the habits in place, then again, we're going to rest back into that familiar place, for most of us, a place of some level of suffering. And so I still follow my protocol. I still use the same habits that I generated during that kind of deconstruction phase for me. And it includes exercise every day, so socialization, spirituality. I check in with myself every day. Every day I'm self-confronting on some level where, and what that looks like.
What does that mean? Yeah.
What that looks like is it's just a thought dump. I usually either type it out or write it. Getting it out of our heads is essential.
So I thought dump every morning.
Good. Yes. It's what do you get out of it?
It's life-changing for me. Like there's times where I'm dealing with kind of extreme stress. I've got a thorny business issue. I've got a thorny leadership issue or a people issue that's I'm just spinning on and I'm going to bed with it and, or me and Chelsea aren't doing great or whatever it is. And I'll go through this process when I wake up first thing in the morning where I'll meditate and then I'll go through and most of it's just a thought dump. I use kind of these prompts to start it. But it's amazing how good I feel at the end of it and how much clarity I have.
Yeah.
And most of like that stuff that I was dealing with, I realized it wasn't either real or it wasn't important. And the second one is like I have like some real actionable stuff that I can go get momentum on. And I think for me, when I can get some points on the board, I feel proud. I feel like I'm moving forward. And I think that progress is so important.
Oh, for sure. And I love what you said. Like when you get it out of your head, I mean, if you think about it, we process air, we take in and, we inhale, take what we need from it and exhale. It's no different with our brains. We've got to get things out of our brain that are just rattling around in there. We get congested. We do. So I love that you do that. And one of the things I do when I thought dump is I'll take thought errors. I'll kind of break down like, okay, these are the things that I'm thinking that aren't even true or that I can't know are true. And I kind of call those thought errors. And then what I also do is I pull out the truths. Because I think, again, going back to what we were talking about earlier, truth is so formative and so powerful in our lives. And some of those thought errors I have to essentially restate as truths, but it helps me keep a very clear perspective. It keeps me in alignment with my goals and my values.
Yeah.
And there's something about living in alignment with who we were created to be, right? Like there's something about being true to who we are and what's important to us that to me, that transcends any feel good, movie that I've watched or book I've read or conversation I've had, there's some feeling that comes with that alignment that I can't get. And for me, it is very spiritual, right? It's like me aligning with who God created me to be.
Yeah.
And there's just something to that I can't get from anything else.
So that practice of just getting it out on
getting
paper.
it out and
that's happening when? Is it in the morning?
Yeah,
is
in the
it
morning.
in the evening? Like when is the time?
I do it in the morning. I know some people do it in the evening, and I've heard it's very helpful to clear your head out before you go to bed. I don't sleep well anyway, so nights are a little funky for me. But I love doing it first thing in the morning because, like you said, then you've got actionable items, you have some direction, you've taken the trash out, right?
Yeah.
Like you've really just kind of emptied it out, and so you could start the day fresh. So, and with meditation, I don't sit still. This is the longest I've sat still in like maybe a year. But I do a lot of movement meditation. Like either I'll go on a walk or even sometimes just do yoga moves while I'm
I've heard
meditating.
that from a lot of people that like your brain operates differently when you're walking.
Yeah.
Like when you're actually in movement.
Yeah. Yep. Part of that, they've just found, I think Huberman was talking about this, that your eyes are constantly scanning back and forth, which helps balance the brain hemispheres. Because you're watching for oncoming cars, dogs, whatever it is, and that helps to balance the hemispheres in your brain. Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I have found when I'll go out on a walk or even sometimes I'll just go walk for a couple hours and make phone calls.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And it's really productive time. Some of the most productive calls. And, for me, so much of life is sales and it's recruiting or it's, trying to convince people, to go do something, to either sell us a company or, why we're a good place for them to invest money or whatever it is. And I think being in motion just allows better energy. I'm sharper.
Yeah, you're in motion, you're breathing fresher air, you're in nature, right? And I think we tend to break ourselves down into pieces, but it's the integration of the whole, the physical, the spiritual, the mental, the social. When we can find places in each of those areas where we are integrated, we started talking about mental health. The best definition I've ever heard of mental health is flexibility, the ability to pivot in any given moment, to stay true, to stay grounded to who we are, but be able to pivot. But we can't do that if we're broken into pieces, right? So we have to integrate into a whole being, our whole self, which then lends to the flexibility. And we can do that in that expanded space of, stimulus, pause, response. So much better as a whole than as
so what other habits? You talked about some daily habits. You've got your working out. You've got kind of the whatever you would phrase that, thought dumping or kind of just getting kind of a plan. Or
I kind of think of it jokingly as mental gymnastics. Like it literally is sometimes, because sometimes I don't want to, and sometimes I'll start and I'm like, I'm fine today, right? But it really is like almost contorting myself into a place where I have to do that every day in order to get my head cleared, especially when I'm listening to people a lot of the day.
You got to show up.
I've got to show up. And I have to do it from a clean space. Yes. Yeah. And I have to do it from a clean space because what I never want to do is conflate their story with mine.
Yeah.
Right. And so coming at it from just being able to step back and be like, I'm here for you. There's this concept. Have you heard of the concept of holding space?
I've heard of it. I wouldn't know how to define it. I've heard of it from my wife.
Oh, okay.
She'll use that language. So she probably heard that from you.
Yes. And there are a lot of different modalities. There are a lot of different ways of looking at it, but it's essentially allowing for the differentiated self. Like you get to be you and I get to be me, but your story, your emotional energy, where you are in your life is not conflating or affecting mine and vice versa. So one of the best practices here is validation. Like if you came to me and you were like, this thing happened and this is how I feel about it and this is what I want to do. And I could just sit and not be emotionally pulled around by your experiences and maintain objectivity, then I'm in a much better space to hear you, to validate you, and then to pose optional through questions, really. But one of my favorite questions is, okay, what else can be true? Right? When you've validated someone and like your thoughts and feelings make a lot of sense based on your experience, what else can be true? What can you control here? Right? Or help me understand more about what you said here. We're pulling things out of the subconscious mind, those stories, and we're laying them on the table together and just looking at them. and shifting them around, right? Looking at them from different angles, that lends to emotional and mental flexibility.
Yeah.
That's the objectivity.
No, it's so profound. I could literally go through this stuff all day.
It's so fun.
I'm not going to take you all day, but I would love to have you back.
Anytime.
Because I think there's some of these that are themes, and I think we're kind of scratching the surface on some of these, but to go deeper on some of these themes, specifically around mental health, around leadership, around habits and rituals.
Can I say one thing about mental health? Because you brought it up about the person you'd had on, and that was like the most listened to part of that podcast. Is there's so much conversation about it, and there's so much interest in it, and there's an equal amount of fear. And I think people understanding that everyone has mental health issues.
Yeah.
We are on a spectrum, right? And the goal is not to get to a place where we no longer have issues. It's to get to a place where we can have compassion for ourselves, where we can resource not only internally, but externally, have support systems in place. A lot of the mental health issues currently are due to isolation.
Yeah.
And even just the thought that I'm so different than everyone else, even if, you're in the workplace or you have friend groups, but you're consistently telling yourself that story, that's a mental health issue. It doesn't mean we're broken. It just means we're human.
But I think there's tremendous amount of fear.
Oh, it's so much fear.
You know, if somebody finds out that I won't be enough, or they won't like me, or they won't accept me. And, and I think like life is hard as it is. Like, I think about this a lot. Like, my human nature is I want people to like me.
Sure.
And then I think of like the most profound humans that have existed, and about half of the world doesn't like them.
It's so
You know what I mean? Like, you take Jesus and they crucified him, and I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, like about half the country hates you.
Mother Teresa, there were people who distinctly disliked her.
Yeah, and you kind of can go through about every category. And so I think that it was actually like this like interesting turning point for me, where I just realized I can't control how people receive me or how people feel about me. Like, that's their stuff. Like, all I can do is just go do my best and strive to like do right by people.
And think, Casey, if you were to be liked by everyone, it means you would have to deny who you are. You would have to constantly be shifting who you are. You'd be chameleoning all the time in order to fit other people's ideal of you. Yeah. Which is, that's wholly unhealthy and an impossibility. So letting go of other people's perceptions of us and showing up based on values, not based on outcomes, but this is how I choose to be in the world. Yeah. Some people aren't going to like that. Some will be intimidated. Some will, that's on them, right? You choosing to show up based on who you want to be and what your values are, that's within your control. Yeah. And you can do that literally every day in any situation, always.
Yeah. This is so fun. Thank you for coming, and can't wait to do it again.
Thank you.